Today we've got the ultimate Psyker guide so that you can become the warp god you've always dreamed about. At least most of the time. And I've seen a ton of poor Psyker boys devastated because they think that it sucks, and in the sense that it was sold to you, I would agree. It's not the elite hunting god mode character that was shown to be. However, it is a god tier AoE control support. And in the background, you can see the mobs getting CC'd and are almost unable to attack back at all, letting everyone else really play their roles and freely do whatever they want, which makes every single tier 5 lobby run as smooth as butter. And because Fatshark keeps nerfing movement and dodging, it makes being able to lock down the whole map and control the flow of the game with this build insanely valuable. So instead of me talking about something I don't have over 100 hours on, I brought someone in that does. Smoothbrain himself, otherwise known as Eternal Prof, and he's the Psyker I take to almost every single tier 5 group with me, and if you've watched previous videos or VODs on the alt channel, you've seen him in the bottom left absolutely popping off in almost every game. But he's also the co-host of the Y Quiz podcast that I host, and someone's opinion and theory crafting that I trust as much as my own, because I've played with him for over 15 years at a high end on MMOs, and he used to theory craft with me on WoW, whenever that actually mattered, but his input is very valuable as a successful end game player with a ton of hours. So I quoted us having a discussion to help you guys make the biggest impact with the strongest Psyker build that I've seen and played with. So we're lighting this off with the Warp God Force Sword Lightning Staff build.
Warp absorption is probably the only viable thing because you get 10% toughness on kill. And then you have Psychotic Wrath.
This is where most people are fixated on his row 2, actually.
So gain 5% to 50% damage with force weapon attacks based on your current peril, right?
So for this one, you'd probably get about 8.5% all the time out of it.
And you've seen the videos, right? You see how it goes up, the peril goes up and down. It doesn't go up steadily. Like,
no, it doesn't.
It is too much. It's not worth it, right? Then the center one's called Inner Tranquility. Plus 6% pearl resistance per warp charge, right? And these are warp charges from the warp siphons. Right? In this build, I always have 4. Like, when it matters. When there's battles and shit, I always have 4, right? So, like, while brain it up for a sec, what's going to do more damage? Ability where you can literally do more attacks.
You can attack a quarter more of the game with the middle row.
That even goes better with the staff. Third row, Psychic Communion. This is my go-to ability. So whenever you or an ally in coherence kills an enemy, you have 4% chance to gain a warp charge. So that's 4% chance per enemy you kill or your boys kill. Whenever you're killing enemies, you have warp charges, basically. Yeah. When you're killing enemies, I get warp charges from you killing enemies. Without this, you got to do Brain Burst to get.
And Brain Burst is annoying to cast all the time because of just the people killing mobs, etc. Like,
and it takes a long time to cast it. And people are like, oh, the last talent makes you cast it faster. We'll get to that, right? So then this one's good. Psychotic Aura, Psykinetic Aura, 15% damage ability cooldown. But with Curios, right, and the way this ability is, I have my Psychotic Wrath or whatever on like 15 to like 25-second cooldown.
We can just call it Psycho. Everything
Psycho Wrath.
We can just call it Psycho Wrath. That's
Psycho Wrath. Yeah, I got it. Like, I literally got that shit on like. If you watch my VODs, like, I got that shit on like 15 to 25-second cooldown.
I'll have them running in the background.
Yeah, like it's always up. Cerebral lacerations. Damaging enemy with your brain burst ability causes them to take 50% damage from all non-warp sources for 5 seconds. But this proves my theory, though, that like this was kind of leaning towards a support class. Fourth row, Kinetic Shield. I'm like iffy with, and that's based on warp charges. So that kind of ties into the build I'm running too, where you always have warp charges. But the last ability is just too quality of life not to take, especially in Darktide, right? And that's Mind in Motion. Your movement speed is not reduced while quelling Pearl. Yeah. You're like moving at 35% movement speed or some shit when you're quelling Pearl. But even then, the movement speed, especially when you have to dodge, and that movement speed, it slows down your dodging too, right?
Yeah.
So, like, that's just too good not to take. Fifth row, get Kinetic Flare. I love this ability. All attacks have 10% chance to hit to Brain Burst the target. This can occur at critical peril. It has a cooldown of 15 seconds. All of your staffs, you're never hitting one target. Honestly, this is up every 15 seconds. So I'm always seeing brains bursting. So this tied with Psychic Communion, I'm always just having max fucking warp charges all the time. You know what I mean?
Well, it also doesn't have an internal cooldown, right? So it has an internal cooldown on the mob that it brain bursts, but it can also brain burst each individual target once every 15 seconds, not just every 15 seconds.
You can pop 2 heads at the same time.
Yeah, but it is only a 10%. Yeah.
Yeah. And then now, since I have so much warp charges and I can build warp charges a lot, right? So this is the 6th talent row, right? And then you have Ascendant Blaze. This is what I'm using. Psychic Wrath expends all warp charges, supplies stacks of soul blaze to enemies hit based on number of warp charges expended. Enemies killed by your soul blaze effects from any source, that's the key thing, right? Have a 10% chance to grab you a warp charge. So I Psychic Wrath, I get rid of my 4 stacks, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now Psychic Wrath, huge AoE. Like whatever's on my screen is the hitbox, basically, right?
Yep.
Wherever direction I'm facing, and you can go across the whole room, basically, right? In those giant rooms, you can go across the whole room. And I'm expending four things, but everybody hit by that's getting Soul Blaze, right? And they all get the Soul Blaze AoE dot, right? From any source is a key thing. So if you kill the shit after I do the Psychotic Wrath and they get the fucking Soul Blaze,
Mm-hmm.
and you kill it, you have a 10% chance to grant me a warp charge. So literally, so if I do this till 100 mobs, I drop all my stacks. I do it to 100 mobs. I'm getting like 2 to 3 stacks instantly, basically.
The reason I liked your build so much when we were playing high tier, right, was simply you always had warp charges. The amount of lightning that is firing off on all the mobs is crazy. Everything's always on fire, and it actually just feels like everything's CC'd the entire time, and you're bleeding it out most of the time too. So like whenever I hit something, it just doesn't matter. I can focus the big elites because the hordes are always melted, right? Nothing's attacking back, and everything's just really smooth.
You know why I say you never the most with like the lightning staff, the surge staff, you should only at most half charge it, right? If you want to be a little extra, like in reality, you should like 10% charge it and let it go, let it rip, right? And just spin around and hit everything as you can, as much things as you can, right? It's like attack how it looks. Palpatine's like force lightning,
Yeah.
right? It doesn't attack like that, right? It's like literally Thrall's chain lightning.
So it bridges to the closest target all the time.
Yeah. Yeah. So you can literally hit a lot of people with it if you just literally try to hit everybody with it. And the stagger lasts for like 5 seconds.
Mid-interview interjection right here. This is where the best Curios are going to come into play, and I think that having a balanced combination of 3 different Curios like this are pretty much the best. You basically want cooldown reduction, combat ability regeneration, block efficiency, or toughness damage reduction, prioritizing the cooldown reduction and the combat ability regeneration. I think that these are going to absolutely just be key in every single build like this, but more so for this build specifically, having that extra cooldown reduction is going to go a really long way. The block efficiency can make you feel insanely tanky, and if you got the toughness damage reduction, it would just help you exponentially too. So keep all these things in mind when you're searching for the best Curios. Again, these are insanely heavy RNG, so like even getting one of the good things is good enough. So good luck.
Yeah, so you can get perks for combat ability regeneration, 4%.
Like everything having combat regeneration on it. Obviously, it's not viable to just have combat regeneration on everything right now because it's still pretty early on in the game and the shop's still
Good luck.
So, like I only have 2 combat regenerations with like the perfect loadout on my main, right? So
I think the most important blessing you should get on any staff is terrifying barrage. So you don't have to worry about enemies just running at you and attacking you if you don't get an attack on them. And then I'd probably you can up the charge rate of your secondary charge attack, and you're basically spamming that mofo, and it stacks up to 5 times, so you can get it pretty high up there. Get those 2 blessings, you're solid.
Another mid-interview interjection is we forgot to talk about the actual modifiers that you actually want on the weapon, and I went back and asked him afterwards, and he said you would really want as much warp resistance and damage as possible with a decent amount of coil speed, charge rate, and critical bonus to whatever you could get on it. Essentially, you're playing a support role, so like if you just want to show it off and tell us about like the theory behind your build.
If you play with a lot of assassins, you're going to realize before you can get one brain burst off, they're killing elites. Same with all the other classes. A Zealot can run in and melee an elite down before you get your second brain burst off. And that feels bad. And FEATS promoted you to be a elite killing god, but that's not happening. And the main theory is to make sure those guys that can kill elites in 2 seconds can kill elites in 2 seconds without getting back attacked or zerged by a horde. Because that horde's being staggered by you, and or they're all getting killed by you. Because with this ability, you're also doing a lot of damage. You can literally wipe out hordes by yourself. Just chain lightning. Just spamming chain lightning.
Spam on top of everything else is just insanely good. And then on
Yeah.
top of that, you got your spam ultimates with Soul Blaze.
Oh, and T-Mog, you got to wear the prison outfit to get max damage.
So to sum up the main focus of the build, it's to keep all your buffs up passively, while CCing everything and dealing a ton of consistent AoE damage, with tons of passive single target and burn damage all blended together in a magnificent display of Force Lightning. And it really does control the flow of the game and make sure that the ball stays in your court, because the only way to actually lose in Darktide is by getting overwhelmed by the situation that it throws at you. So making sure that doesn't happen is your absolute #1 priority. And being able to consistently do that on demand is everything you could dream about having on your team. Now, just the lightning staff and this feat build can be used on the majority of the staffs, in my opinion, but there's obviously things you can change from maximum a little better. But I think the key talent here, if you are using staffs, is Inner Tranquility, as it lets you get the most out of every single staff by letting you attack just so much more. And while the other 3 staffs have potential, I just don't think they feel quite as good to have in a group. But that being said, everybody likes to play their own way. Everybody likes to have their own thing. And honestly, you should play to your own power fantasy of what you enjoy. So we will talk about the other 3 staffs. And the best perks for percent damage would be Carapace and Flak, because they do feel really good. And if you get lucky, crit chance can be nice too. So the Purgatos Fire Staff can pump absurd fire damage out, but mobs often ignore its stagger and punch your dick off interrupting you. So having the focus channeling blessing is absolutely mandatory for this thing and makes it insanely fun. And from what a lot of people told me on my best weapons video, the damage doesn't actually matter on this thing as much as the burn does, the warp resistance, and the cloud radius. The quell speed can be mid-tier, but it's really important that you go for burn over actual damage. This was feedback from quite a few different people. And one of the staffs that's really hit or miss is the Trauma Artillery Circle staff. It's cool, but in my opinion, it just misses the mark on what your role should be. But if you do want to make it work, Warp Flurry helps it feel at least somewhat okay. And for trauma, you'd want to focus on damage, charge rate, and blast radius. And the VoidStrike penetration staff has potential for a solo carry elite hunter build that you really wanted initially when you started playing this class. And if you get the Warp Flurry blessing on it, it actually makes it feel really good too. And for VoidStrike, I was told that you want to focus on damage, charge rate, and blast radius with mid-warp resistance and mid-quell speed. And for melee weapons, we have the Force Sword with the attack speed and block efficiency perks. I think these are 2 really good perks to just have on a melee weapon in general. And for blessings, we have Exorcist and Riposte. But Blazing Spirit can be really cool too. Now, all of these things are crazy RNG, and even getting one of them is really good. So mainly on a Force Sword, you really just want to go for high damage and high warp resistance, because the warp resistance for the staff builds really just goes a long way in making them function correctly. Being able to switch to your Force Sword and Quell while having more resistance to the warp is just insanely valuable. Now, for the people that really don't like using the Force Sword at all, I know there's quite a few of you, the rapier, the axe, or the dagger are all really good. You'd want to take a dagger with bleed, obviously, because bleed is just ridiculous on the melee weapons right now. And then for the rapier and the axe, you're going to want to go with block efficiency perks, and then brutal momentum and decimator or shred on the axe, and then riposte or shred on the rapier. And then honestly, if you get a really good legendary roll with amazing perks and blessings, that thing's automatically amazing, because any weapon in the game can actually be good. It's really just coming down to your personal preference. And I personally prefer the Force Sword. And after talking to Eternal, I know he prefers the Force Sword too. Now, the best combos across the board just going to be Force Sword and any of the staffs. Being able to quell in melee while you have to be in melee helps to round the build out and just make it feel insanely smooth. On top of that, the Force Sword just synergizes well with almost every build a Psyker can do. Now, the rapier or the axe are amazing early game choices and have their own place based on personal preference. And again, I know a lot of you just dislike the Force Sword from my best weapons video, so they're also very solid options for you. And I know support isn't what a lot of people were hoping for, but it really doesn't feel like support when you're playing this build. It's so fun, and it simply performs so well that after having it in your group, it feels almost mandatory to have. So you should not feel discouraged at all about playing Psyker. Your lobbies definitely need this kind of support, and I promise you, it does feel amazing to have on the team, and it feels amazing to play too. And I honestly think the CBT Psyker nerfs were pretty unwarranted. I think that the Ultimate should quell 100% perils again, and there's also a bug with all of the staffs that can make you randomly jump from any percentage of perils to 100%, just randomly exploding you. So if those changes ended up making it in, I think it would open up a absurd amount of builds for Psyker so that we could see some more interesting gameplay and make all of the staffs genuinely just better. And if you have a favorite weapon, don't get loadout gatekept. Take to heart what was said about the feats and build something special that works just for you. In all situations, The Inner Tranquility feat, again, will make every single staff not only feel better to use, but help you let out its true potential. Now, it is the ultimate guide, so for the Psyker leveling build, just try and take the feats in this order, and every Psyker build feels bad with all the feats if you are leveling, if you're trying to use a staff. So using a Force Sword and a Shotgun, a Braced Autogun, or an MG-12 Infantry Lasgun will hard carry you through the early stages of the game, and the Lasgun will carry you into the late game as well, until you can make the most out of a staff. And thank you for teaching Roman numerals in the last video. I genuinely appreciate it, and now I know that what I thought was 7 is in fact 12.